Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that?
Because
that is something that no president
I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I give him the space to negotiate.
In this video, far-right MAGA figure Scott Jennings was once again on Abby Phillip's show, acting as confident and provocative as ever, throwing out insults and pushing claims that many see as misleading or false. And in this segment, we are going to break down clips from this intense panel debate on Abby Phillip's show, while I also share my own thoughts. So let's watch into it together.
Tonight, a question about American values. After President Trump warned that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, he has since delayed that threat now for 2 weeks, but it still sent shockwaves all over the world, including the Vatican.
Today, as we all know, there was also this threat against all the people of Iran. This is truly unacceptable. There are certainly issues of international law here, but much more. It's a moral issue, for the good of the people entirely.
The Pope has been weighing in on this conflict for a while now, but I think you described it as a genocidal threat. Other people have described it that way. I mean, there's this debate always, should you take Trump literally or seriously? But whether you take him literally or seriously, saying that you're going to end a civilization is a serious threat that no American president has ever issued before.
And you shouldn't. And honestly, those sorts of things just really are very unhelpful. But I will also say we're not unaccustomed to him doing this. He did it with respect to North Korea. He said similar things with respect to China. He's made bluffs with respect to Canada. He's done it over and over again. And every time that he does this, I find that the media is running around chasing its tail with respect to him. I get he's the president of the United States. He should not be saying any of that sort of thing. And it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. At the same time, how many times are we going to do this with this guy? I mean, why? I mean, why are we engaging?
You can blame the media, but it's also
so the onus is on us to say, oh, well, we'll just ignore him because he's making statements like a mad king. So we just normalize it as, well, that's just Trump being Trump and move on. Is this someone that you would tell your kids that you should look up to this guy and believe what he says, with the president of the United States, or just, well, you can go around and say whatever you want and threaten to, annihilate civilizations and just, it's the media chasing its tail every time he says something like that.
In fact, I've said exactly the opposite to my kids. I have said exactly the opposite.
I'm glad. Yes, so why is the standard different for the president of the United States? You wouldn't let your kids get away with something like that.
Because it's happened over and over and over again. Yes, and he wasn't. He is the president of the United States.
So isn't it the media's job to hold him accountable for it?
You have to actually deal with what you have. Right. And what we're dealing right now is with a president that, again, I take the view, and I know it's a minority view, what he has done with respect to Iran has been good for society. It's been good for the world. Hamas has been degraded. Hezbollah has been degraded. The Iranian military, the nuclear, it is an evil nation state. I look at the long game rather than a bunch of talking heads.
We're not, like I said, we're doing the service to Mad Kings. Mad Kings haven't said things like that since going back to Genghis Khan. True. This is not even unprecedented in modern times. It was unprecedented even in medieval times to say things like this. And what a president says matters. It's not enough to say, well, that's just Trump, and let's not chase our tails around this. When we have politicians at this table. When politicians speak, what they say, the way they say it matters and ought to matter. When I was a child and came home and if I used a profanity, my parents then saying that's just Bobby being Bobby and we should go on with that. I got my punishment for that. And the president should not get a free pass. He's an 80-year-old man. He's a grown adult. He cannot be just simply brushed. This kind of behavior, this kind of language cannot simply be brushed away. A civilization, for crying out loud. We're not even allowed to say that about a town or a village. We're not supposed to use language like that. George Bush went to Iraq and he used very different language. The language, I covered that war. And it was not a war I was in support of, but I covered it as a journalist in Baghdad for 5 years. I distinctly remember George Bush saying, we come to Iraq with respect for your civilization, with respect for the faiths that are practiced here. There's a difference. Presidential language goes down in history.
Agreed.
And that's got to count for something, and we cannot simply brush this away like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have any respect for the government, for this regime, but I'll tell you, unhinged and unhelpful. That's the only way when you read something like that and you say, how does this advance the ball forward? Mm-hmm. And also, there's only so many times you can cry wolf and say things like that are so extreme and crazy where people just blow you off, including other world leaders and don't take you seriously. And I think the more this, yes, we're desensitized. You're right. And that's not a good thing. And by the way, a little language, I'm from Jersey, so a little's okay.
Before we get into the MAGA-style mental twists coming from Scott Jennings, I just want to point out how weak this argument from Chris Mattel really sounds. Because just think about it for a second. Is there any company in America that would allow an employee to act the way Donald Trump acts, or say the kinds of things he says? The panel compared it to a child, and honestly that fits, because no parent would let their kid behave like that and then just shrug it off when others complain by saying, that is just how he is and we are not going to correct him. And if you look at it from a workplace perspective, it becomes even clearer, because if any employee was posting or saying the kind of things Trump puts out on Truth Social or in public appearances, they would be fired immediately. And if it were a CEO, they would be removed without hesitation. So the real question is, why is this accepted? And the answer seems to be that many Republicans are either afraid of Trump or simply choose to go along with whatever he does. Because if there had been even a basic level of accountability, this situation would have been very different, not just in 2016 when he first ran, but even after he got into office and had 4 years to show exactly who he was, followed by more years of the same behavior, where he repeatedly made statements that would have ended the career of any other politician. Yet he continued without consequence. And it is hard to ignore that at some point Republicans could have stepped in, drawn a clear line, and refused to let their party be shaped entirely around him. But instead they chose to support or stay silent, which makes them part of the situation. And looking ahead, it is not difficult to imagine that once Trump is no longer in power, many of the same voices will try to distance themselves and claim they were never truly behind him, including figures like Scott Jennings, who may one day say he never supported Trump when the political climate shifts.
I'd read this because this is conservative commentator Orrin Cass. He's close to Vice President J.D. Vance. He says, simply put, what is the point of all of this? If these are empty threats that we all know he will not carry out, then they are ineffective threats. The Iranians are on X too, and merely making the president and our nation look foolish. If they're not empty threats, and the president is asserting the American position that such actions are acceptable in this situation and ones that we are willing to take. We are not living in some quantum thought experiment where he is simultaneously is and is not serious.
Mm-hmm. I don't agree that he's made empty threats as it relates to Iran.
This is literally an empty threat.
I don't think the people that we decapitated at the top of their regime would call them empty threats either. I mean, we've clearly demonstrated the interest in using the U.S. military to take drastic action.
All of the shifting deadlines.
Right.
What do you call the threat this morning to end their civilization, only to accept a 10-point plan that was put on the table yesterday as the basis for negotiations?
You haven't seen the 10-point plan A. All we know is that they said they would reopen the strait. Beyond that, we don't know anything.
Hold on a second. The president retweeted the Iranian foreign minister's statement, which said explicitly that they are using the 10-point plan as a basis of negotiation. I'm not making that up. The president reiterated that on an X post, Scott.
But
so my point is the threats from Trump
and some of the stuff that's
to bomb their bridges, to bomb their desalination plants, to bomb them out of their civilization off the face of the earth. How are those not empty threats?
Well, it looks like it brought them to the table tonight and got them in a place where they would agree to a ceasefire. I mean, I'll give you a counter argument to all these other positions, which is
that is not connected to reality.
We have a ceasefire.
Tel Aviv is still under attack.
The same table that we have tonight is the table that existed yesterday, in large part. And fundamentally, the only thing that has been agreed to is that Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz and will allow ships to go through on their control. That is the only thing that has been agreed to.
The strait is going to be reopened, and we're going to negotiate about the rest. Beyond that, we don't really know much of anything. But I will tell you, yesterday, Iran was saying, we're cutting off, talks. We're not going to continue the talks. The president uses some extreme language, and all of a sudden, voila, tonight, we have a ceasefire for 2 weeks. Why can't we just say, you know what? Maybe we have achieved military objectives. Maybe we have taken down their military and their ability to export terror. Maybe we have decimated their missiles. Maybe we've buried the nuclear material. And maybe we've got 2 weeks to make the world a safer place. Why can't we look at this as a glass half full moment as opposed to,
but then
we have to make it negative for Donald Trump.
But why can't you just acknowledge that what Donald Trump said this morning was abhorrent and that no president should ever threaten annihilating a civilization? Why can't you just acknowledge that?
Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs
Why
to talk
can't
to
you
them.
acknowledge that?
Because
That is something that no
because I don't
president
take
of the United
orders
States
from
should
you,
say.
number one, and number
I didn't
two,
say,
I give him
I'm
the
asking
space
you a
to
simple
negotiate with the
question.
Iranians
You
the best way he
just
knows
asked us,
how.
why
All right.
can't
Well,
we
let me
accept
just
this? I'm
ask one
asking you
final. Let me
why you
ask a
can't
final
accept that.
question, Scott, for the record. Do you think it's acceptable for the president to threaten to annihilate a civilization?
I think it's acceptable for the commander in chief to deal with these people in the best way that he can.
Is that a yes
to
or is
get
it a no?
result.
Is
And
that
I
a
give him
yes
the
or
and I
is
give
it
him
a
the
no?
latitude to
So
do
that's a
it.
Is that a
yes.
yes
I'm
or
not
a
going to second
no?
guess him. I'm not going to second guess
So
him.
it's a yes?
He put out a statement. We now have a ceasefire.
Okay.
Those are the two things that
I just wanted to ask for the record.
Yes.
That's a yes on your part.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there.
I honestly feel like I would not last very long on Abby Phillip's show, because if I were Tara Setmayer, I would probably lose my patience and snap back at Scott Jennings in a much harsher way. And while people on the panel manage to stay composed and keep it professional, you can tell it takes serious restraint, because even if some of it is for show, his attitude still comes across as overly smug and frustrating. And it really makes you wonder how far he would go in defending Donald Trump, because it feels like no matter what is said or shown, he would still refuse to criticize him, almost as if nothing could make him admit that something Trump said was wrong, which is why it stood out when Abby Phillip pushed him into a corner and made it clear what his answer really meant. And the reason I keep making these videos is because I believe there is still value in discussions from the progressive or democratic side, since at least there is an attempt to bring ideas or arguments to the table, whereas a lot of these right-wing voices seem to offer little beyond repeating the same talking points. And you would think that every now and then there would be a moment where you could disagree overall, but still acknowledge a fair point, the way I sometimes find myself agreeing with Tucker Carlson despite not liking him, especially when he criticizes Trump on certain issues or calls out things he believes are wrong, even if he has supported him in other ways. But with Scott Jennings, it often feels like constant praise and defense without any real pushback, night after night, and it raises the question of how someone can go on television so consistently and take that position, even if the incentives behind it might make it worthwhile for him. So I want to know where you stand on this entire discussion. Let me know what you think about in the comment. Make sure to like and subscribe for more.